And welcome to the King Arts Complex. My name is Demetrius Neely, and I'm the CEO here, and we're so delighted that you've joined us. The King Arts Complex, our tagline is where dreams come alive. And the reason we say that is because we have this award-winning youth arts education program where when our kids get on this stage, their hearts just smile. We've seen so many incredible stories. I'll tell you two quick ones. One is a young lady who was in our youth education camp and spring and winter academy and summer camp, and she blossomed so well that she began to teach in the camp, and now she's a university professor at Capital University. Yay. And then another quick story is a young lady who was in our camp. She went on to perform in Hollywood, and now she's in a movie, a major role in a movie that's on Nickelodeon right now. So we're so proud of her. So dreams really do come alive. So our mission here is we connect community through the arts. And when we say community, we don't mean the micro community or the community. We mean the world community. We mean the macro community. We mean the worldview community. And that's what we're doing here tonight. And we also, so the grammarians and the authors in the room may get mad at me for saying this, but we also see community as a verb and a noun, and we think we're doing community tonight. So that's a lot about what we do here. Thank you. And then the final thing I'll say about the King Arts Complex is that we are a multidisciplinary arts organization, which means we have all the disciplines under our management. So performing arts, visual arts, media arts. If you haven't been here for a while, you may not know, but we have a quarterly podcast. And then the literary arts, which by the way, media arts. Our kids are in the 4th year of creating short films that they write and produce themselves. So we're really proud of that, happy for that. Thank you so much, you can applaud that. They actually do everything, from writing the script to writing the score. The last film, a 15-year-old wrote the score, and it was an amazing score. They do everything, so really good stuff. And then I will tell you literary arts. So we collaborate with Gramercy Bookstore about twice a year, Linda, maybe? At least twice a year on these book talks, and it's always great. I am so proud of our relationship with Linda Cass. And speaking of Gramercy Books and Linda Cass, please welcome to the podium the visionary and CEO of Gramercy Books, Linda Cass.
Oh, Demetrius, thank you so much. I think you're a little taller than I am. Thanks to the willingness of the King Arts Complex to be our venue host and partner inside this spacious Nicholson auditorium. We are so thrilled. I have to say, this is kind of a repeat event. We were just talking about that. When Ross Gay did the Book of Delights, we had Ross come in to Gramercy Books. Hanif was there. We had an unbelievable conversation between the two of them, and it was pre-COVID. So we had 65 people in seats, and we had about 30, we stopped counting, of people standing. And we can't do that today. So we are very, very lucky that we could move our site and have it here where a lot more people can enjoy this evening. So we're thrilled to feature New York Times bestselling author, essayist, and poet Ross Gay, and this electrifying collection of essays, Inciting Joy. And we're equally excited and grateful to have Ross in conversation with beloved Central Ohio poet, essayist, and cultural critic, Hanif Abdurraqib. So give him a hand. And I want to recognize the Ohio Poetry Association for joining with King Arts Complex and Gramercy Books to present tonight's program. Along with King Arts Executive Director Demetrius Neely, I also want to recognize Performing Arts Director Javon Collins. He's been great working diligently with us on the facility logistics, so we're really appreciative of that. To quickly preview the next hour, after my introductions, Ross and Hanif will talk for about 40 minutes. Ross will read some passages from Inciting Joy during that time. We'll have 15 minutes for your questions, 15 or 20 minutes for your questions, and then afterward, Ross will sign your copies of Inciting Joy following the program on the right here at the table just to my right. Gramercy Books continues to offer weekly author events for the community to enjoy. You can find our full author programming on our website, gramercybooksbexley.com. Tonight is our final author conversation program of the year, and so great to end on this note, I'll tell you. I'm now planning programs for early 2023. We've got 3 events in January, very quickly. They're all taking place at the bookstore at 7 p.m., and that includes on January 10th a panel of 5 local poets, a book launch and author conversation on January 18th, and our book club format program on January 26th. So you can sign up for our e-newsletter, or you can check out our website and you can learn more about all of them. So now tonight for our evening's program. In his latest collection of essays, Ross Gay considers the joy we incite when we care for each other, especially during life's inevitable hardships. Throughout Inciting Joy, he explores how we can practice recognizing that connection, and also, crucially, how we can expand it. In an era when divisive voices take up so much airspace, Inciting Joy offers a vital alternative. What might be possible if we turn our attention to what brings us together, to what we love? Full of energy, curiosity, and compassion, this book is essential reading from one of our most brilliant writers. Ross is the New York Times bestselling author of the essay collection, as I mentioned before, The Book of Delights, also 4 books of poetry. His collection, Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude, I believe we have that here tonight, won the 2015 National Book Critics Circle Award and the 2016 Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award, and was a finalist for the National Book Award. Another collection, Beholding, won the 2021 PEN American Gene Stein Book Award. Ross has received fellowships from Cave Canem, the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, and the Guggenheim Foundation, and he teaches at Indiana University. Tonight's conversant is someone quite familiar to Central Ohio audiences through his poetry, his prose, and cultural writings. Hanif Abdurraqib. His most recent book of essays, A Little Devil in America, Notes in Praise of Black Performance, was a finalist for the National Book Award in Nonfiction, and named one of the 10 best books of the year by Publishers Weekly. He's the author of 2 poetry collections, The Crown Ain't Worth Much and A Fortune for Your Disaster. His first collection of essays, They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us, was named a Book of the Year by NPR, Esquire, BuzzFeed, O, the Oprah Magazine, Pitchfork, and Chicago Tribune, among others. Go Ahead in the Rain, Notes to a Tribe Called Quest, was a New York Times bestseller, a National Book Critics Circle Award, a Kirkus Prize finalist, and was longlisted for the National Book Award. In 2021, Hanif was named a MacArthur Genius Grant Fellow. Now let's bring to the stage Ross Gay and Hanif Abdurraqib.
So, it's good to see everyone here. Thank you for coming. Backstage in the Michael Coleman green room, I was telling Ross about how I'm growing competitive in areas that I did not believe myself capable of being competitive. One of them being writing, and not in a sense where I want to be better than someone, but in a sense where I read something from someone and I say to myself, well, that can't stand. I gotta do something about it. And it's this sense of awe and wonder. It's the envy that is manifested through awe. It's like I want to achieve what this person has achieved, and no one does that for me more frequently than Ross Gay. And so it's always a pleasure to be here with you and here with your work, and it's just a real honor.
Thank you for doing it. It's a big deal to me, man. Same thing, you know. One of the things, and we might talk about this later, is that you know, it's beautiful to have people who you know a little bit, like we know each other a little bit, but whose work you're kind of like spinning around. And you know, like riffing is one of the things that I'm sort of just interested in, is, you know, non-citational or non-propertized citational, you know, fucking around. And I feel like, and that's called being friends in a way, whether or not you know each other deeply, you know. And one of the things that I love is that I feel like we're talking to each other in our work all the time. You know, I mean, am I shout him out in this, because I'm ripping on something he's ripping on.
I can't lie, when I saw that shit, I was I was trying to play it cool about that. But when I saw that, I took a picture of it, and I was like, I'm living this out on the first date, so it's like Ross Gay shot me out. This is wild though, because, so the first thing I want to get to is a thing that fucked me up, because it's the white chocolate Jason Williams thing, where...
Look, I swear to God, I was like, there are 11 people in the world who are going to give a shit about this metaphor. And Hanif is one of them. I mean, and I think it's the best thing I ever wrote. I think it's the best thing I ever wrote. Maybe I'll have to read it. But I was like, yeah, this is one of the people. It's like you, Patrick Rosell, it's like Natalie Diaz. It's like 4 people who are going to care about it.
I was so hyped about that, because for those who have not read Inciting Joy, how dare you? But if you have not, you should. But there's this piece where you so brilliantly break down not just the basketball move, but the looks that are on the faces of those who were victim to the move and those who pull off the move. This was one of those moments where I read something and it rewired. My new book I'm writing a bit about basketball, I'm writing about the Fab Five, and there's this infamous picture of Jalen Rose and Chris Webber in each other's faces, you know. And I remember being a kid and seeing that scene play out, and all the announcers were like, why are they talking shit to each other? But what I knew was like, these are two people who love each other, who are exchanging. And so to get to this point where you're talking not only about the nuances of a basketball move, which you do very well, but also the kind of, the politics of facial expression, right? My first thought was, how much did you watch that play in the process of, you know, how maybe this is a broader question about research and citation and how you return to the physical world to find a nugget to expand upon. But did you return to that play a lot, or did you return to those highlights a lot to extract that image?
I'm going to read it to you real quick.
Yeah, that's what I didn't want to be demanding, but that's what I was really curious towards.
So this is an essay called, so all the essays are called incitements, and they're like subjects. And so this one is on the cover songs. And it's the 10th incitement, and the title of the essay is How Big the Boat. And I talk about all these cover songs. And it starts off talking about this game that me and my buddy Scott came up with. And the game was basically like, oh, what if, what do we call it eventually? I call it unlikely cover. It's basically like, you know, what if, you know, like when Johnny Cash was covering, you know, 9 Inch Nails or whatever. Like, okay, that's weird, that's neat. You know, but what if like Aretha Franklin covered 9 Inch Nails? Or what if, you know, and on and on and on. And I talk about Luther Vandross covering A House Is Not a Home, Dionne Warwick, which is pretty good one. This is 3 paragraphs. This is 4 paragraphs. Also a head chopper. I guess earlier I talked about a cover as a head chopper. Also a head chopper, one of my favorite songs of all time, in which whenever it comes on, like whenever, I always shout, oh, or no, or come on, like always. It's Luther Vandross's version of Dionne Warwick's recording of A House Is Not a Home, music by Burt Bacharach, lyrics by Hal David. This version is classic Warwick, restrained, sleek, bouffant, classy, a soundtrack to a martini, grown enough to like an olive with a drink. There's a photograph of my father and his father, my papa, where my dad looked sleek and Belafonte-ish in his slim suit, standing behind his dad, drink in hand, maybe with a hand on his cross-legged pop's shoulder. who also has a drink in hand, also well-dressed, both of them unsmiling, very handsome, in a well-appointed mid-century house. Warwick sounds like whatever party there, which means no shade to Warwick, whose voice is a marvel, her pitch and pacing gorgeous, but whose vocal scope seems somewhat to hide in those tunes. I'm not an expert, but you can tell when you listen to her rip it on some of those live videos of That's What Friends Are For. Luther Vandross was also very good live, and he was astonishing live at the 1988 NAACP Image Awards, where, in tribute to Dionne Warwick, he sings "A House Is Not a Home," which, I don't know about you, but I'd be nervous, because even though Luther's the one on stage, he's also sitting at Warwick's feet. Let me tell you, when Luther Vandross is singing, the entry to a single song is worth the price of the ticket. As in this case, he offers 3 or 4 distinct Lutherisms as a way of saying, I'm going to take this for a spin. Dum-dum-dums and hey ya babies and oh yeah honeys and whoa yeah and such, about which the audience laughs and claps, which Vandross provokes again and again, as though he's a conductor, which a good performer is. He conducts mostly with his voice. Sometimes it's a riff for that stammery climbing the register thing he does. Sometimes a flourish on the lyrics, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, hello, bye-bye, baby. Or a look, lest we forget that sometimes we hear with our vision, and Luther's bedroom eyes harmonize with his glissandos. He makes us laugh or gasp or smile or clap or reach up or reach out to touch you sitting next to you. You notice that? How what delights you, what is impossibly beautiful, makes you reach out to touch you sitting next to you. Or reach out to whose song it is, and so who gave it to you. It is a gratitude that, thanks to BET and the NAACP Awards, we get to witness this particular circuit of generosity and reverence, occasionally in a split screen showing Luther and Warwick simultaneously, Luther inside Warwick's song, Warwick Backrack David's song, I guess. Warwick watches very closely, never taking her eyes off him. It is something like the teacher watching the grasshopper becoming the teacher. She's studying him, grinning or shaking her head no, or waving like, come on, or even once or twice puzzled like, what is happening? Like, did that just happen? It is cousin to the face made by Gary Payton when Jay Williams, AKA White Chocolate, he didn't name himself that, on a breakaway off a dead left shrimp fumble with only Payton in between him and the basket, sprints full speed at Payton, arguably the best defensive guard in the history of the game. He'd definitely say so anyway. Who is in his stance, eyes locked, ready to pick this kid's pocket, or at least make him wait for his lollygagging teammates. I'm so glad to get to use the word lollygagging. Within a step or so of Payton, Williams crosses over through his legs from right to left and freezes him, which actually means drawing Payton. Think lure or attract, but also think like an artist. He renders him forward onto his toes. At this level, we're talking about centimeters. We're talking about milliseconds, the consolidation of the future and the past. It's quantum as hell. At which point, he crosses from his left back to his right, pushing the ball out past Payton, who can do little more than turn his head behind him to see Williams float a bank shot over a very diligent shrimp. No luck, that left. When Payton trots back down the court, he's smiling in the direction of the younger Williams at what just happened. Payton's smile is, if you play ball, you know, the admiring disbelief that might be verbalized as, this motherfucker. Which, incidentally, I'm realizing is precisely Warwick's face at Luther. This motherfucker. When Williams glances shyly at Payton, the goldfinch of a grin crosses Williams' face, at which Payton lights up like a sunflower. This motherfucker! Thinking about that phrase, with which, oh, believe me, I'm intimate, I say it every time I play, I realize this is a crucial designation because it implies or it implicates both Williams and Payton, i.e., it might as well be we motherfuckers, because it's true, we did that.
We're not going to spend our time up here talking about ball the whole time, but there's like no greater gap between what a player actually was and what their highlight reel says they were than Jason Williams. You watch the Jason Williams like highlight clips, and you're like, this motherfucker was averaging 25 and 10. Then you look at the numbers and you're like, Oh, no, that's right.
Yeah.
He was like pretty average. He was okay.
Right.
A lot of turnovers.
Yeah. But when it was good,
When it was
oh my
good,
God.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, it was crazy.
I would attempt some of those passes too if I could pull off one every now and
Oh,
then.
absolutely. I get caught watching, we're going on track. I get caught watching, like what he's doing now. And he's like this really sort of generous elder statesperson, and he's like, showing people how to do some of these crazy moves, and it's really lovely, because he kind of says what you said. He's like, I should have probably practiced shooting a little more,
This is actually a perfect segue that I just now dreamed up. Knowing one can make the impossible pass and showing restraint otherwise. The thing that I find in your work that I try to pursue in my own work with less success is these kind of impossible threads weaving together. And I'm wondering if there is a point in process where you are aware that you've perhaps pulled one thread too many, and does that awareness incite you to keep going, to be like, I can make it? Or is it kind of like, I probably need to dial back? Because I feel like my impulse is always, I can make it work.
Yeah. Oh, my inclination is always to try.
Yeah.
Like I'm like an overwriter,
Yeah.
and I think one of the reasons I overwrite is because I'm like, there is something so beautiful that I can't yet conceive of, but it's starting to like shimmer a little bit. So let me try to get at it. And then, mostly, it doesn't work. But periodically, when it does.
What it does, and the belief to know that you can make it work.
Totally.
It's like, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's really the reason. That's really the reason I'm very interested in writing, because I know. It's also the reason, my friend Patrick Rizal, another poet, essay writer too, who I play a lot of ball with, and he makes fun of me because I say, like, the reason I like to play ball is because I know that, many reasons, but one of them is that something impossibly beautiful might happen, and because I'm kind of an elbow guy, and like I'm a little, like a junk guy, he kind of says bullshit, but I think that's the reason I like to write, really.
In thinking about Pat, because when I first read this and got to the piece that's after Pat, I went back to read Bone Shepherd's. It's one of my favorite poetry books of all time. If you've never read Bone Shepherd's by Pat Rizal, please do. And there's something about length. I mean, he's like one of the great long poem writers, I think, because of this. It feels like he's reaching for something and just like running into the darkness until he finds something to drink to. So I'm interested in this book, which is more, it is stretching its legs more than Book of Delights, which I know was a book that was in part also a practice, or dominated by a practice, right? How did you reel yourself back into a practice that wasn't informed by your living? Or in the kind of strict sense that Book of Delights was, where it was like, I've lived a day and I need to write this Lydia of a day.
Yeah. Great question. Great question. One interesting fact about this is that I was working on a Book of Delights, kind of concurrent with the latter half of working on this. So some of the things that were delights originally became part of these essays. So there is an element of that. They're like little vignettes that show up in there that are actually part of, we're pulled from this next Delights book. But I think there was some sort of, that's a hard question. One thing is that those delights, though the practice is to write them in one day, and like they're sort of drafted in 30 minutes actually in a day, the revision process in a way kind of extends them, So they might be less different than those, except that the longest of them is very long, and maybe like 55 pages. And I think that some of those long ones I've been working on in various ways or trying. It's funny, like some of these long ones came out of these essays I was writing about basketball, actually. And they just sort of didn't quite work in the form that they were going in. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know exactly how to describe the difference between them, but I do know something about this, that the questions that these essays were asking were, I think, probably questions that I could not have imagined getting to, getting under in 5 pages, most of them,
One thing I've been kind of an obsession of mine lately has been with the entitlements of my past selves, right? To suggest that if one endures something less than pleasing, then the world in return owes them something that might resemble pleasure, right? And what I loved about particularly the opening of this book was to consider, or maybe the fullness of the book is to consider joy as something, or pleasure as something that requires patience that we're not owed, that is sometimes stagnant and traveling towards us as we are traveling towards it. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the patience of pleasure, or the process of pleasure that is divorced from entitlement. The wanting of joy that is maybe detached from understanding that one is owed it.
That's so good. That's a great question.
I really worked on these. I was like, if I'm doing this again, I gotta really focus.
That's a really good question. I think one of the things is that, and I wonder if one of those, like that's a kind of relationship to the idea of joy that I would say is kind of an immature relationship to the idea of joy. The idea that you're owed something. And I think there's kind of immature notion that I hear. Well, I hear it a lot in part because it's on all the commercials. I don't watch TV, but I know what the commercials are, or whatever the fuck it is, on the billboards and shit. It's like everywhere you can go buy your joy, and it's really, that's effectively what it is. And if you don't, like, you're messing up, or like it's an acquisition and it's an accomplishment. And to me, that's just like so not what I'm talking about. And I think that's one of the reasons that people, will sometimes poo-poo joy as like a not serious consideration, or a less than serious sort of whatever you call it, emotional endeavor. And I'm like, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is something like what emanates from us when we help each other carry our sorrows. And given that everyone, in my experience, has sorrow, everyone is heartbroken. And my understanding is, or my belief maybe it is that everyone has access to joy. So it's not an entitlement, but it's more almost like I'm going to say it, but maybe it's not right, but it's more like there's something about it as a shared burden, in fact, because again, like to me, joy is not absent the fact that who we love will die, has died, is dying. We, as are we. This will be the last time this group is ever in the same room again, for all kinds of reasons. It's just like what it is. And I think, then to sort of imagine that like happiness or something. When I think of pleasure or something, like I don't think of that as a pleasurable state. I think that pleasure is tied up into it often. I think it's the case that when we're more acutely aware of like, like Donny Hathaway sings, like, this could be the last time, It makes things more luminous. But I think that's not an entitlement. I think that's an understanding that we are dying,
Have you ever heard Otis Redding sing My Girl?
I haven't heard him sing that, no.
Otis, so I love the song My Girl. And I think, though many people have taken it on, the chorus is where you make the song yours, right? Whatever you do with the I guess you'd say, well, that's where you make something. And Otis Redding, has anyone here heard the Otis Redding version? The Otis Redding version is so good because it's colored with this deep sorrow, right? He kind of stumbles over the I guess and he fumbles his way through the you'd say, and you can tell that he's imagining the world where she has already left, right? And so much like this, I guess my question largely is about grief and the way that we understand grief as something that never exits. I remember when I was young, when I first heard the Otis Redding version of My Girl, I was like, I don't want a girlfriend and she'll make me feel like that. But I guess what I didn't understand was perhaps he was wrestling with this immense pleasure of knowing the love of someone who might no longer exist somewhere down the road. And my earliest ventures into grief, particularly around death, were with this understanding that I would move beyond it one day. When you're young, you're like, well, if I'm not thinking about this anymore, then I move beyond it. Not realizing that when you lose someone, your world reorients itself, right? Because the world has been populated with memories of what was, right? and you write so thoughtfully about grief, particularly the loss of a parent. And there's this bit of an essay where you talk about perhaps reaching to call your father, despite him being gone many years. And I had a moment recently with folks, some folks know, one of my mentors was the brilliant Greg Tate, the critic Greg Tate. We lost about a year ago. And as I finished my last book, I was like, damn, Tate's got to see this shit. And I went to like actually type in his email, right, to send it to him. And I thought, oh wait, how strange. And I guess my big question is, do you have any perhaps gratitude even for the absence that was once filled by the person, the people you still reach for, to know that the absence is there, but the reaching is still required?
Totally, yeah. I think the absence, it's a beautiful, I think automatically I want to say yes, and in part because I think the gratitude is for them when they were there, which is actually hard to do sometimes, be grateful for someone who's in your presence. And also to be grateful for what remains when they are no longer there. I feel like that's, they're very much connected, and I'm absolutely, and in ways like when I think, I read a lot about my father in this book, and I'm profoundly grateful for him. I'm grateful for what he in his absence is teaching me. It just feels like endless, and I will not stop doing that. He will not stop teaching me until I'm gone. And I feel profoundly grateful for that. Yeah, I don't. I also, it's funny, when I was driving here, I started thinking about, and I don't know what this is, but it's connected a little bit to that Otis Redding version, maybe. I'm interested in endings. I really, I just was thinking, I don't know if there's, but I think ends of songs, how people finish their songs, or Ada Limon. I think I heard her give a talk about the ends of poems one time, but ends of movies, and ends of lives. I'm interested in that. I'm interested in, and I think in part, my practice or my curiosity is also how to be right now we're in the middle of the end of our life. How do we live if we do that? Our lives are ending. We're in, but it's it strikes me that that's a question of joy.
Yeah.
If we are acutely aware that we are turning, what kind of luminosity is present, and also what kind of tenderness and care is possible. That's really, deeply one of my questions.
And this kind of, I think I am also obsessed with that, which is why I love so much of the parts of the book that dealt with grief, because I'm also obsessed with endings, and particularly the way songs end in the versions of ourselves. So when Brian Wilson was making Pet Sounds, for example, he was asked the question of, why a song that God only knows ends on a chorus loop and fades instead of hard stops. Most of the songs in the era did a hard stop, and he said this thing about the song will be going on in eternity somewhere, and there will always be a version of you with that song somewhere, right? And I am fascinated perhaps in endings that allow for a version of myself to still live beyond, either in a memory or in a kind of infinity loop, understanding that I'm going to leave behind something. Because I know that's how memory works, right? I still, I had a moment recently where I realized my mother had been gone so long that I cannot grasp the sound of her speaking voice, but I remember her singing voice. I remember the way it sounded when she laughed, right? I remember these things, I remember the mechanics of her voice, but perhaps not the primary function of one's voice, at least in her mode. And because you wrote so richly about your father's loss in the book, I'm wondering how your memory around his life was perhaps reconstructed through the process of these revisits.
Well, one thing that how old were you when your mom died?
13.
You were little, yeah.
Yeah.
I was 29, I was old enough to have, to be an adult, if you call it that, And for me, I was getting there. But I spent a lot of time, not a lot, I just find myself often, and when I started thinking about my folks, I find myself often making a joke at the idea of a 48-year-old person thinking about his parents the way a child thinks about their parents, And which is also to say that part of I think the process of this book is is the ongoing process for which I feel gratitude, and which is illuminated by my father's absence, and my mother's getting older, frankly, is that they were beautiful, are beautiful, fallible, complete, complex, rich people, you know. And so understanding my father while he's gone makes me way more interested in having I have so many more questions about my father. Whereas when I was young and mad at him and, you know, like all this stuff, I knew shit about him. Now I know nothing about him, except like, yeah, the sound of his voice, like the singing voice, or like, you know, these things. But now I just wish what I wish. Now I spend a lot of time kind of wondering, oh, I wonder why that. Like, I wonder why this thing that he never told us, or I wonder why he couldn't talk about that, you know. Which feels like aging. It feels like, you know, it feels like a blessing of aging, because I now am at the age where I realize that all the shit that was puzzling to my dad and remains puzzling to me, to other people is puzzling about me.
Puzzling, yeah. There's the kind of grace that, there's a grace that death affords, or that absence affords, that is perhaps similar to the grace that aging affords when we realize we are becoming the people we perhaps did not always have grace for. You know what I mean? That's jarring. In a good way. In a good, like a necessary way, but jarring.
We just had this whole conversation in class this morning, and it was sort of about that. It was sort of about, it's like the last couple classes, but the sort of witnessing people change. Understanding that people change and witnessing them change. And those people sometimes being ourselves.
Yeah. And how do we afford that same grace to ourselves that we might to the elder who we say, oh, they don't know any better.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
How do we convince ourselves that we don't yet know any better?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I wanted to ask, even though this is, I don't know, I get, as someone who writes across genre, we both probably get similar questions about the differences, which forgiveness to anyone who's in here who's ever asked me that question. I don't think that on its face is the interesting question, but I do think the interesting question is, for me at least, what poems taught me about how to expand a thought into something useful. Like what I love about that Peyton Williams piece is that we are actually almost in a room watching two separate panels of a thing happening at once in our brain. Our eyes are just ticking back and forth between the two. And that requires a real commitment to stillness, I think, to convince people how to read your work in a way. I feel like I've trained myself into read. I use the poem Feet, for example, your poem Feet, whenever I teach in almost anything, because I think that is a perfect example of how to teach people how to read Ross Gay's work, right? To say, just wait and something else will happen. The thing that you thought wouldn't happen is going to happen. And if you thought the thing was going to happen and you're waiting for it, it's not going to happen where you expect it to happen, right? How do you teach yourself how to edit your own work? Because obviously, I feel like I know what I do well. I know, it's like basketball, right? I know how to get to my spots. But it took a different kind of work to train myself how to edit my own work gently with what I know I can do well in mind. Is that a different challenge for you each time? Do you have to kind of ramp up to that each time?
Yeah, one of the things, I was just on a panel with the writer Simone White, and we were talking, and Simone said something about, I can't remember, about poems, and her poems, I love her poems, and there was something about it, and they are very complicated to me. There's a certain kind of, they're unfamiliar to me. My poems are familiar to me. Mostly, by the end of making them, they're fairly familiar. Not completely. But part of me was like, at the moment, I had just finished reading her book, and I was like, I like your poems more than I like mine, And partly it was because they were a mystery to me, So a lot of what I'm always trying to do in writing these things is and this is a puzzle. It's like, how do you infuse what you do not know how to do with all of your sort of chops? You know how to do all this stuff, but part of what I'm trying to do is make these things rich enough, complicated enough, that they actually are a puzzle to me. Because the shit that I understand perfectly, I'm not interested in. you know? Like essays of mine that I'm just like, you know, like I just know them inside and out, you know, I don't look at them and I'm like, I tend to be a little bit bored by it, you know? But like that long grief essay in here, or like, I mean, one of the pleasures of some of these longer essays is that there's like these kind of eddies and places where I'm like, I'm not quite, like I know I'll be coming back to that for years, you know? So I guess my answer is like, just to say, yeah, that's hard. I don't exactly know how.
Right.
I do have readers though,
Yeah.
who like, you know, Pat, Anastalis, and other people who kind of help me to kind of dislodge what is familiar or to push. In that poem, Beholding, I remember I was wanting to make a move that I knew how to do, and my buddy Chris Mattingly was like, you always do that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
you need the reader who knows your work well enough to say, I see you doing the thing that you want to do, but the thing you want to do doesn't serve the full body of the work. Yeah. I think about how you mentioned Ada earlier, Ada Limon, who I love her new book, and I love it in part because I love an Ada Limon poem because I will read it and be like, nothing really happened, you know, and yet everything happened. I feel so fulfilled by it. You know, there's a poem about like that. I think the poem that opens at any kind is with the groundhog in her yard. I remember reading that poem, being like, this was so fulfilling, and I don't know if a whole lot happened. I love a song where not a whole lot happens. I love a movie where I just love, you know, like Shinny Easton's 9 to 5. The whole song is essentially like, my boyfriend's got a job. That's, you know, goes to work, comes home. And I think actually it's a triumph, though. It's a real triumph of the fact that you could build out a world around these really small, patient movements without getting bored as both writer and reader. This is not going to lead to a question about writing. I'm sorry. It is going to instead lead...
It leads to a question I have for you, but you can ask yours first.
It's going to lead to a question about basketball again.
I can go for that. Let me ask my question.
Yeah, ask because yours is better than mine.
Well, you've said patience like 3 times.
I know.
4 times.
Yeah.
Tell me about patience.
I don't have much of it. I think, you know, it's interesting because I've been struggling with the fact that as a human, I feel my life is almost dominated by patience. Like I think that the way that grace most manifests itself through me is through patience and through perhaps endurance of both comfortable and uncomfortable things that I don't necessarily want to endure, but I am skilled in the art of patience. I think it has to do with being the youngest, right? Being the youngest of 4 and being in a position where the hierarchy of the household suggests that you are not the one that people listen to. Which is a hierarchy I appreciate. Even, you know, I didn't have much worth to say when that was worth listening to be clear. But in my work, I don't feel like I'm patient. And I'm trying to build upon, you know, it's a thing we do. We sometimes try to build a bridge from the skills of life to the skills on the page, which is becomes more daunting perhaps as we acquire more skills in life and more on the page all at once. But when working on the latest book, I found myself saying, okay, you know, there's a moment where I'm writing about Dick Snyder hitting a shot for the Cavs in 1976. And there's a moment where he flicks the ball up in the Richmond Coliseum. And the way the camera frames it, the orange ball going up against the blue baseline or the blue sideline looks as though a sun is setting, right? The sideline appears higher than it actually is. The ball is descending. And I was like, I could just watch this over and over again. And what if I didn't write anything? What if I just watch this and then let whatever evangelical notion I have, I chase that, right? I think that is where I find myself in terms of patience manifesting itself in my work. Why don't I stop and reorient myself with the understanding that I cannot be the authority on the miracle. The miracles already existed, right? But that's hard. It's hard, right? Because sometimes we witness something, it's like, I have everything to say about this wonderful thing I've witnessed. It is different if it's something in real time, right? It's different if it's like, I am the person witnessing this thing. I am the archiver. I'm the archivist of this miracle. It's like me on a street corner and I'm watching these 2 birds fight over that type of shit. But it's different when it's like, I'm watching this thing that many people have seen many times, and my job is to perhaps reframe the viewing of it on the page.
Yeah, it's a beautiful concern because it feels also like it's, the concern is also to be like, we know this is beautiful,
Yeah,
but it might even be more beautiful than we know.
yeah.
You know, so it is that same gesture, like, look at this.
Yeah,
You know?
it's what I love about the sample in hip hop, for example, is these things already exist, right? The way that musicians pull from existing soundscapes isn't to say, I'm improving upon this, though if that can happen. It is sometimes just to say, I want you to have this in a different way. Like, I want you to hold this thing. Of course, sometimes it's just like haphazard, sometimes just to make a hit, you know? But that's the same shit with the right. Like, sometimes it's like, if you rush too much into that shit, then you're concerned with the regurgitation of, like, the engine of nostalgia is actually beauty, right? Whatever beauty we can place into what people know has already existed before we're regurgitating it to them. So there is a patience of saying, I want to show this to you in a different way, you know? I spent so much time, for example, watching LeBron's chase down block in the 2016 finals. I was writing about it. And I remember, before I had seen it, I remember writing a line, something like, oh, LeBron comes out of nowhere, but he doesn't come out of nowhere, right? He's there the whole time in the frame. He's just patiently, that makes it more miraculous. To realize that he did not come out of nowhere actually makes the thing more of a miracle. To realize that this is a person who was counting his steps before launching. To realize this was a person who timed his acceleration and ascent. All that type of shit. To be able to say, much like why I love that Jason Williams, Gary Payton thing, is because I've watched that clip a million times, right? And I've never once thought about the exchange, the wordless exchange that takes place in the kind of chamber of sports playing, where people look at each other, especially people well-versed in the many ways shit can be talked. You know what I mean? They look at each other and beyond language, there's something else. Yeah.
Thank you.
Now I forgot what I was asked, wasn't it? Do you want to read another part of the book?
Oh, yeah.
I would love to hear you read another part of the book. I actually don't know, Linda, how are we on time? Are we like, okay, you should read a thing.
Okay. I wanted to read this, let me see it. So this book has a lot of footnotes. They're too long and too many. But I'm just going to read this one footnote. No, I'm not. It's too long. It's too long. You said 5 minutes? Okay. I wanted to read this in part because you mentioned Black Don't Crack in one of the essays. I can't remember. This is an essay, the grief essay, and I'm sort of talking about I'm having this whole conversation again with my father, and the question is sort of like, how do we learn or think we learn, some things, in this case, like, how not to grieve in a way, and I think I'm probably making asking the question of, is the inability to grieve one of the modes of masculinity that we're taught? And, like a kind of murderous mode, too, of course. I'm talking about my dad, who, seemed not to get hurt. You still think I'm playing? But I haven't even begun. My man actually tore his left Achilles tendon in his late 40s or early 50s playing volleyball at the Burger King regional picnic about 45 minutes away up in King of Prussia, and proceeded to get in his car, a clutch, to drive himself home. The next day after surgery, he had wires like whiskers coming from his heel. Maybe the wires were like exposed ductwork or something, not sure. Or how, despite having a broken foot and a cast up to his knee, the dude carried me on his shoulders the entire day through SeaWorld because little Rossi, get ready for it, refused to ride in a dolphin carriage or walk, which, as far as I'm concerned, warrants throwing him in with the octopi. Or, as we've already gone over, going to work every single scheduled day for months, despite having what looked like an upper respiratory infection, but was a rapidly growing tumor on his liver. My father's memorial was held a couple weeks after his death in his Uncle Roy's brother's big backyard, in his brother Uncle Roy's big backyard in Mount Airy. Typo. As memorials sometimes are, it was a reunion. And we visited with relatives we had not seen in years, decades some, like my cousin Heather, who made it up from Charlotte for the service. Some of the sweetest memories of my childhood were spending time with that set of cousins in Youngstown at our papa's, cookouts and touch football. They were a big crew already, 5 kids. The 2 older boys, Jason and Clay, were like gods to us. Though Heather is our age, between my brother and me, and so more mortal. And Joel and Austin were little kids. At the memorial, Heather looked fit and radiant, and I said, "Damn, you look exactly the same." Which was not true, because the last time I saw her, she was probably 13. But she knew I meant she looked good, and so she laughed and said, "Well, you know, black don't crack." Because I'm anticipating the possibility that you, dear reader, might be one in a heterogeneous audience. In fact, it is my hope. It is possible that you are unfamiliar with the vernacular phrase, black don't crack, which in its simplest interpretation means black people look younger longer than white people. Definitely younger longer than really white people, whom sunlight puts a whooping on. Hard to argue against that. I'm sorry to perpetuate the black-white binary here, but as far as I understand the phrase, or when I use it, I'm talking about white people, especially really white people. Also, just to the side of the aforementioned, whether it's for melanoma or liver spots or colonial, etc. residues, if you feel compelled to carry an umbrella on sunny days, bummer. Important to note that black don't crack is largely aesthetic, referring primarily to suppleness and elasticity of skin, wrinkles and such. In other words, it is about form, not function, which perhaps is why it was in no way a contradiction or paradox to say such a thing while on the mantle no more than 15 feet away in a shiny brass urn were my father's ashes. And though black don't crack's most common usage pertains to melanin's effect on wrinkles, it's impossible for me not to also read it in a way best expressed at a men's league basketball game in West Philadelphia I was playing in around 2006 or so, when a 20 or so year old kid on the other team went to the basket and got tangled up on his way down, rolling his ankle, and sat there a second clutching his foot, wincing. He rolled on his back like a potato bud holding the top of his high top. An older player on his team, maybe 25 or 26, walks over to the kid who's groaning in pain and says to him, let's say unsympathetically, what I've come to think of as an analog of black don't crack. Real niggas don't stay down. The kid took the advice, retied his shoe as tight as he could, climbed gingerly to his good foot, and hopped limped to the foul line, making both, and stayed limpingly in the game. To say I agreed with the sentiment would be understatement. I felt bolstered, buoyed by the tutelage, and by the receptiveness, the obedience of the student. For I too was a citizen in a nation of real niggas not staying down. Evidenced by, for instance, just to keep it on the court, just to keep it in the body, when my nose got broken from a flailing elbow going up for a rebound, a dent like a thumbprint you can still see the shadow of. I played another 3 or 4 games without saying a word. Or when coaching at Piscataway and teaching the kids how to attack the basket from the corner, blocking their shots, Ronnie Free attacked the rim and my mouth with his elbow and knocked my teeth all the way down, hanging by a thread, to which I said nary a word, revealed nary a thing, but just snuck to spit the blood in the trash cans and pry them back upright, hoping for the best. Or to return to the gridiron, to say nothing of getting knocked dizzy and staying in the game, and where the directive not to crack or stay down reveals its intersections with some more obviously nefarious shit. When I tore my medial collateral ligament in college, which I quote-unquote recovered from quickly, i.e. I played in pain with a torn medial collateral ligament, I was made aware of and invited to participate in a study in which the principal investigator wanted to confirm what he suspected. Your rate of healing corresponds to your levels of melanin, i.e. black people heal more quickly, i.e. black don't crack. If you think at the time this set off eugenical alarm bells or raised my hackles, you are wrong. I took it as a compliment. I was like Luke Cage with a limp. I was a real nigga not staying down. About which you know 1,000 things, but let me focus on 2. First, to bring it back to my father, about whom this footnote is meant to clarify some things and deepen our understanding. Dude could drive 45 minutes with his foot flopping like a fish because he had no choice. Like so many working people, he had to get to work. Sickness or injury or respiratory infection are not exactly choices for the broke or the precariat or whatever word it is we're using these days to mean the profoundly expendable underpaid masses who used to be in unions and so used to be less expendable and less powerless. To be clear, when I have the sniffles, I stay home. Matter of fact, If I dream of having the sniffles, I stay home. I will put that in the file of my ancestors' wildest dreams. But I bet if I was working at Burger King or the jail or the chicken processing plant or an Amazon warehouse, I'd be less inclined to call in sick, because they can fire your ass for anything. How many COVID deaths attributable to the breaking up of the unions, to NAFTA, let alone the absence of universal health care? Better yet, how many deaths, period, attributable to imposed poverty? There's a figure, and I assure you it is much larger and indeed includes and is in some way obscured by the highest COVID number out there. CNN, I'm sure, won't be reporting on that one anytime soon. And if you were a black person born in 1945, more. Which is to say, staying down was not an option for my father. And you might imagine, I do, that a reasonable parental obligation for such a person would be to convey as much to one's child, me, who, let's call it the result, had the best attendance in the history of Samuel Everett Elementary School, mascot the frogs, among other things. You can imagine it being one in that large and tear-stained sack of tricks for how to keep your black child above ground as long as possible. It's like Jenga, hundreds of balsa wood blocks dumped onto the ground and engraved with the following. This is how you behave when you're pulled over. This is how you behave in the company of white people. This is how you behave when they accuse you of something you did not do. This is how you behave when you're obviously the best candidate, but they chose someone else. This is how you behave when you overhear them saying what they really feel. This is how you behave when you know what they'll do to your children. This is how you behave when you understand your death, and definitely your pain, could be useful to them. This is how you don't crack. Which is to say, second, my father, Gilbert Frank Gay, aka Poochie, who indeed, in my memory at least, seemed disapproving of your speaker, his beloved son, little Rossi Gay, for crying as a little guy. Poochie was simply the inheritor and purveyor. He was simply, again, the messenger of a black prohibition on black cracking, or staying down, which is a perfectly reasonable response to white supremacy's objective to crack us up, break us apart, break us like slaves, put us down. By the way, that us is not only a black us. White supremacy's objective is to break us all apart. Though I suspect the prohibition itself cracks us up. It lays us down. In the case of my father, he drank a lot of alcohol, died pretty young of liver cancer. In the case of his son, read on.
I have a thing to say, but I'll wait till after questions. I know Linda wants to see the questions. No, you go. You go.
Anyone have questions?
I just have a quick question about grieving, and I agree that you really never stop grieving. But then I think, were they really even ours to begin with? Because like that's my dad, and that's my mom, or that's, but they're really just not ours, they're everyone's, and we just think that they're ours, but they just happen to be around us, and you just never stop missing them. There's really not a question there, but I just want to comfort people that haven't lost their parents, or people that they care about. They're just there, not for you, and they're not your property. They're just, you're lucky to be around them, and they're so much more than just how you think that they are for you. It's kind of selfish in a way.
Yeah, it's lovely. I mean, it's like, especially I think we experience this in all kinds of relationships, but with parents. Because our parents, we imagine as ours. Just like people imagine their children as theirs often, but, yeah. Right, yeah. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things too I've been thinking a lot about aging and dying and all these things. And in part, the thing that's so beautiful to me about being around very, very old people, Gerald Stern just died, poet, 97 years old. Just amazing boy, beautiful dude. You know, and he's 97. Like, you know, my Aunt Butter here in Youngstown is about that age. I'm not supposed to say how old she is. But when, you know, they get that old and they start, you know, we start to, our body, you know, when you're 48 or whatever, our bodies are changing and very different than when they were 28. And 98 is a completely different ballgame. And one of the things that's so beautiful to me, and I'm thinking about this, and thinking about why it's both makes me want to protect those people, but can also be frightening, a little bit repellent, is because I think they're turning into everything. They're becoming precisely the thing that you're saying, which is not ours. They're becoming everything's, you know? And it can feel terrifying, maybe particularly in a kind of like ego-centric kind of way of being, to imagine that I am me, as opposed to like, we are this.
Are products of everyone who we've ever been shaped by, which is, you know, like, when we lose someone close to us, for example, when you know, I tell people I lost my mother, I say sorry for your loss, and well, you know, you knowing me, by virtue of knowing me, it's your loss too. You know, we are collectively losing. But there's also gratitude that I lost, because I'm, again, as we talk about, shaped by the absence. Yeah.
Sure. I have a question. I'm really struck by something you said about how when you were younger, you knew your father, and then once he passed, all you had was questions about who he was. And I think I have a very similar experience of processing people who I can no longer ask about themselves, and an almost arrogance that I had as a younger person, just never asking my grandmother any questions, like 88 years in this world and never asking her any questions about her experience. And I'm interested in what age has done for your sense of curiosity.
I need it to be like, you know, just more and more and more growing it. Like, that's what I'm trying to do. And in part because I think there's a kind of destitution that we mostly live in, which is by not asking each other questions. I mean, to be in a close relationship often is to be like, I really know that person. But when we really know each other, and we don't, if part of our really, not really, you know, look, I learned this in couples therapy, like 2 years ago, you know? So, you know, but like to not, you know, just the kind of incidental brutality that we're capable of by not being like, well, how does that make you feel? Or what do you think about that? Or worse, by being like, well, I know what you think already, which we do all the time. And you know, like with someone who you have a complicated relationship, which is supposed to be a serious relationship with, but like my dad, like I just knew, you know, why this and why that and why that. I knew nothing, you know. I was like a child. I was a child, you know. And at the same time, to I think it's very difficult for parents. You know, I just came from spending a bunch of time with my mom. I think it must. I don't have my own children, but I think it must be so puzzling because I have children in my life who I love, and you get to know them, and you start to imagine you know why they're doing what they're doing and how they're doing it, this and that, and it feels like such a puzzle to just be in these deep and abiding and very close relationships, where wonder is actually the sort of the engine of the relationship, like wondering about each other. So. You know, that's all I can say is like, I'm trying, you know?
Thank you.
So this is a question about the creative process. So I saw Quincy Jones in an interview once in which he was being asked about his musicality. And he talked about whatever he does to compose music. And then he said, and then you allow 20% for the Lord to walk in. So whatever your spiritual reference might be, do you resonate with that thought?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. It's funny, you know, I kind of came up like with a certain kind of, again, like, you know, kind of like a dominator spirit, like, you know, you can work this thing, you know, you can be in control of it, you know, it's a will. And the older I get, the more I'm like, first of all, that everything I write, like you said, is actually all these voices that I don't even know that I'm speaking in other people's voices all the time. In fact, like I never came up with anything of my own, about which I feel profoundly grateful. How lucky that my mother just speaks out my voice sometimes, and I get to be like, oh, and my mom gonna get some apple crisp, or whoever. And that in itself is a kind of the Lord. I think that in itself is kind of Lord. And then another way that I think of that is like this kind of like relationship to or aspiration toward what I could never imagine, and that sometimes the writing will lead me toward these things that I do not know. So I have to think that that is, that is evidence of a kind of mystery that I believe in, and I'm both guided by, and I also try to feel and grateful to. It's a word, yeah. What about you?
I think that it's funny you said the thing about feeling spoken through, or like the language that arrives. Marvin Gaye, Marvin Gaye once said that, Smokey Robinson would find him in the studio in the morning when he was working on what's going on. And he would say, well, Smokey, I don't think I'm writing this album. Like, I think God is writing this album through me, so I don't really know how I got here, right? And there's a thing about writing where I feel like I am being propelled from an elsewhere, but that elsewhere is the many people who are pulling me along with them. And so I get to the end of something, and I read back through it, and I think, well, I didn't write that. Or I wrote that, but it was written through, and being written through by Virginia. I think about Virginia Hamilton all the time. The People Who Fly was the first book I loved. Virginia Hamilton, who's an Ohio. And so many images from that book still arrive on the page as I write. So it's like there's an ancestry that surpasses even my capability to articulate it on my own, which is, like you said, a kind of spiritual awakening.
I have a basketball question, if that's all right. It's going to start off being about basketball, but it doesn't have to be. Ross, you were talking about, one of the beauties of sports is that there's always the potential for seeing something that you've never seen before, right? And I find myself going back, sort of like the Jason Williams and Peyton play, over and over watching the Vince Carter dunk contest, I think the 2000 dunk contest, yeah. And part of it is the dunks are incredible, but what really stands out to me is everyone's reactions, right? And how even today, 20 years later, when someone sees something they haven't seen before, and they don't know how to react, they take a clip of Shaq or KG from 20 years before to express that I've never seen anything like this before. And you mentioned Marvin Gaye. Any of you've written about Marvin Gaye's national anthem at the 1980 All-Star Game, and that's something that I just watch over and over, and just like taking these moments, right? So I'm just curious, what your current obsessions are. Like, what's the thing? What's the moment? What's the video? What's the highlight? What's the music video that you just keep returning to over and over, either now or just over time, that you just need to know more about?
One that you might get a kick out of, that I find myself looking at a lot, is Lionel Richie and Diana Ross singing Endless Love at the Academy Awards in 1980 or something.
Yeah,
there's a look that Diana Ross makes. It's her voice does something, and then she looks off somewhere, and I'm so curious about where she looks at. That's something. There's also the end. The end of the Sam Cooke record. It's the very end, and it's like an outtake of a little interview that someone did, and he.
I'm restraining myself so much because I know the exact thing you're talking about.
Yeah.
I don't want to shout it out. I don't want to because I've been listening to the Sam Cooke nonstop because I got obsessed. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, and this dude asks what does soul represent, and he hums.
Yep.
Like a few bars, and it's the prettiest thing that's ever happened.
It's just at the end of I don't know if you can even find it on say Spotify, but it's at the end of the Greatest Hits. Yeah, it's the Essential Sam Cooke perhaps, and it's like an outro skit. Yeah. I was just listening to Sam Cooke. Live at Harlem Square Club is one of my favorite albums of all time because in the film The Two Killings of Sam Cooke, I forget who it is, they talk about Sam Cooke. I don't, whatever. But if you listen to like Sam Cooke live at the Copa and then listen to Sam Cooke live at the Harlem Square Club, I don't like the term code switcher, but that's like a master class. Because you get Sam Cooke at the Copa and he's doing that like Negro Frank Sinatra thing that white people projected on him. But you get it at the Harlem Square Club, and that's like, the version of Bring It On Home with Me from the Harlem Square Club is like 5 minutes longer than the original. You know, he's doing this like, he flips it, he refers to himself in the, you know, whatever, the third person, you know, does every he becomes Sam. It's like, I don't know, it's incredible. My obsessions, it's funny you brought up dunk contest. A homie, my barber the other day was like, oh, the dunk contest got so bad because the dunkers don't know how to, they cannot do that. And I was like, well, it's not bad because they don't know how to dunk, they don't know how to entertain, you know? Vince Carter was interested in entertainment, winning, yes, but also showmanship. Now, showmanship that involves nothing but the body and what's available. The body and air, and what can happen when those two things collide. Now these motherfuckers are like, showmanship is if what the bullshit Jalen Green did when he was like, I'm gonna buy an NFT before no one gives a shit, man. Motherfuckers come out here like Timberlands and coats. No, that's not showmanship, right? My obsessions, I would say I have a couple, but I'll stick with one. It says to not eat up the time because I can talk about my obsessions all day. Have you seen the Aretha Franklin film, Amazing Grace? So there's this part in Amazing Grace where they play How I Got Over It. And James Cleveland messes up the key at the very beginning. So they have to start the song over. You know, and Aretha, he messes up, but Aretha tries to power through, and he's like, no, let's start again. You can tell that when they start again, she's not all the way there. Like she was there. It's one of those things like, you know, you're there and then someone pulls you back and you gotta get right back in headspace. And there's that part where the choir comes in after the kind of first verse, and the choir, in that version of How I Got Over It, comes in so powerfully that it forces Aretha to kind of snap her head back. You know, she looks back at him like, oh, okay, we're doing this now. And it's this kind of thing where it is not entirely competitive, but it's not competitive. It's that intersection of we have your back, but we're also on your ass. You know what I mean? And there's something about that exists in the, I've been obsessed perhaps with the idea of the choir and how the choir extends to whoever hears a song and deems himself a participant. And so Amazing Grace fascinates me because Aretha Franklin has a choir behind her, but also her father in the front row is a part of the choir. Also, the people dancing in the aisles of it are part of the choir. Also, whoever might be walking by on the street recognizing a song and humming along for a few stretches of sidewalk is a member of the choir. And so I'm interested in the extension of the kind of effusive praise that can come from up here. If you feel moved, then you are also a part of the choir that we have built here on this little stage. So that's an obsession.
Two very general questions. The first one is, if you were just like hanging out at Hanif's house, would you have a similar conversation as you're having? And then the second question is, would you prefer to be musicians rather than writers?
Wait, well, the second question was, would we prefer to be musicians rather than writers?
Yes.
The money'd be better. Well, yeah, well, never mind, actually. Depends on kind of, yeah.
I suspect we'd be talking about some of this stuff.
Yeah.
I suspect we'd be talking about some. I suspect we might also be watching.
I was going to say, we would probably have the ability to kind of guide through the visual aspects of it. I would very much be like, have you seen this thing? And Ross would be like, yes, many times. I'd be like, great, I'm going to show you.
Rather be a musician. I like that question. I don't know. God, I love it though. I love singers. Oh my God, I love singers.
What era? Like a musician right now, today? I would want to be a musician perhaps in an era where, well, okay. I have to remember that I'm black, so. I would like to be on the Chitlin circuit, but would not like to be kicked out of a restaurant for it. You know what I mean? Like, oh man. What would you instrument, or would you want to be the front person of a band?
I mean, I love singers. I love singers. I love singers. Another thing that I think is, I spend a lot of time thinking about is that thing that DeBarge, did you see the little tiny guest concert?
Yeah.
Just 3 songs, and he's, probably 60-some right now, and, he sounds so good. Oh my God, he sounds so good. I don't know, I'm very moved by singing. That 15 seconds of Sam Cooke, when you look it up, it will never not be in my ear, And it's something so moving to me.
And to think that you can be the architect of like an emotion in the way to sing. I am seduced by the idea of being a singer, but I'll tell you what, the first time I ever saw something that made me think that's fucking rock and roll was when I was a little kid, and I saw that infamous video of The Who performing Baba O'Reilly, the one where Pete Townsend does the windmill on the guitar. And I feel like people always see that clip, but they don't see the build up to that moment where he is channeling something through his body. During the third rotation of that, he begins to shiver from the excitement. And I was like, I want to do that. I want to be like a guitar. I want to be like a rock guitarist. I don't really want that anymore, but so to answer your question, I think writing is. I have a piano in my house. The other day I played the beginning of Welcome to the Black Parade by My Chemical Romance, and that was nice. I have no illusions of being.
It is interesting though, because when you were talking, or what you were saying, but I was thinking, about that poem Feet. Yeah. And I was thinking, I learned that from Richard Pryor. The turn I learned from Richard Pryor. And it is interesting to sort of think about who are the performers. If you think of yourself as a writer who's also a kind of performer, where you read your stuff and care about how you read it. All these people who maybe show us how to do it, and some of them are singers and some of them are athletes. Yeah. The people that we study watching perform or watching how to move their body or make their bodies do things, which is what we're doing. Some of them are athletes, Yeah.
And so the turn from Richard Pryor, I've never heard you say that, but that makes that in some ways that crystallizes your work for me and is fascinating.
Yeah, maybe as important a writer as anyone.
You know what's what? Sorry, now we're going on a different.
This is probably what would have happened.
Yeah. I remember, since we were talking about Ball and the Fab Five, I remember Reggie Miller and Jalen Rose had this thing where people were like, yeah, they were so good at shit talking, they would research their opponents. And this is before the internet, right? They would research their opponents and then say things to their opponents based off of what they found out about their families or their girlfriends. And it's I want to work that hard at something, I want to get to a point of knowing. I want to be so invested in knowing that I will go to those lengths. I don't want to use it, there's a way I want to utilize it that's a little less nefarious maybe. But I want to be the person who, with all I have at my disposal, is kind of this analog seeking. I want to show someone something about themselves that they didn't even know they could,
And just to say, one of the things about the kind of criticism that you do and that I try to do is that so often the thing is showing people what they might love.
Right, yeah.
Which is cool. There was a question right here.
Hi, I'm just wondering about how you guys find these magnifiable moments. How do you decide that this moment is something that you can blow up into a universal truth? Are they things that you just have felt and experienced in your life, or is it an active seeking out?
Well, I think one thing is that one of the things is that the questions of attention, and this feels like it comes back to your question about how do you, curiosity or also being with, is that they're all that. They're all that. Everything that you describe with great precision is the most fascinating thing that ever happened, ever. It's crazy. If you look at, a flower that you think you know really well, you know what a dandelion looks like. If you look at it for 8 hours, which is probably a good practice. I haven't done it. I've looked at a lot of dandelions. You will know, we know that we know nothing then. And we also know that anything looked at with that kind of precision is as fascinating as anything else. When everything these days, I find myself being someone in class said something about, what was the question? It was some question, I was like, oh, that's an easy book. If you asked 25 people that question. That's an easy book. Like when you said that ball, that's an easy book. You know, you can just describe that and just think about that thing for like 100 pages. That's easy. And for me at this point, you know, maybe I'm patient. You know, but yeah.
I think one of my favorite Terrence Hayes poems is a poem that, what book did it opens How to Be Drawn. It's called What It Looked Like. And one of my favorite Terrence Hayes lines is very simply, never mistake what it is for what it looked like. And part of my obsession is with returning to things or stillness in knowing that I have made that mistake already many times, right? And I'm not even trying to upend the mistake or correct the mistake, but I'm trying to find the mistake that might be most appealing to you, right? The mistake that I can convince you is the real thing. Because I don't know what I'm doing, right? In a way, I find myself in a contract with the reader that we both are stumbling towards the same thing together, and the thing might not be a conclusion at all. We might get to the end and all we've done is looked at something beautiful for a long time, and that is a type of conclusion of sorts, but it is not the kind of conclusion that might lead someone to a capital A answer about that, right? The consideration of the basketball that turns into the sunset is that the answer there is not about basketball. You know, the answer there is not even about sun or sun setting or color, but there's something else perhaps at the end of it. So I think about that Terrence line all the time about not mistaking what it is for what it looks like, because underneath what something looks like, there's a lot to be mined. If I can get past even the most exuberant, fluorescent type pleasure at what's something that, you know, I like being in awe of beautiful things. It's not like I look at something beautiful and say, well, what's under there? You know, sometimes I like being in awe and being still, but I'm also asking myself what I'm sacrificing by way of those mistakes.
Do you find yourself, like, do you have an answer to that question or a question about that question?
I find myself feeling that awe and then feeling as if I must walk away from it to digest it, to like have it sit inside me, and then it'll come out at a later point. I feel like sometimes looking at something and immediately attempting to dig into it, I'm selling myself short because I've not lived in it enough. I've not lived with the flower 8 hours.
Can I ask a question? Now I feel like, anyway, do you catalog, like when you say you're doing this to return at a later date, are you cataloging these things, or are you just kind of saying, when it emerges, it will emerge, and that's how I know it was worthwhile?
It's most often the latter, because I don't have my notes app open, you know, all the time.
No, same.
Yeah, but if I notice it, I think if it's sticking enough, it will come back when it needs to.
I love that.
Thank you.
One more question, I'm afraid. Okay.
Hi, I was just curious. I lost my mom 2 days before my 23rd birthday. How did you begin inciting joy in the midst of that grief? Like, what was that process like?
Well, my father died in 2004. Does that change your question at all? No. You know, I can just tell you what I think the kind of general origin story of that book is. You know, it's kind of incomplete. But there are two questions. One is that I wanted to address what I think is that immature notion of joy, you know, as a way of saying this is as grave and important and serious an emotion as we have. And also sort of suggest that our capacity to sort of hold that inquiry, do that inquiry, practice that inquiry, might in fact be also a way of, my contention is that it's connected to survival. And then the second thing is that I was sort of wondering, you know, as I'm sort of building that definition or wondering about that definition, the first essay is all about, you know, the last 4 or 5 months of my dad's life. And so I realized after the fact that part of what I'm doing, I'm sort of suggesting that, you know, one of the first things we need to consider here is dying in order to consider this, what I'm proposing. But then throughout the rest of the book, in a way, I'm sort of trying to figure out, and this, like Saidiya Hartman is a real big teacher, Fred Moen is a big teacher, many other writers who are big teachers, but how to point at stuff that, when I say it, they're incitements to joy, or that how are these various practices that seem to me to be the sort of fertile grounds of the stuff by which we learn how to tend to each other's sorrow. So I have an essay about pickup basketball, which you wouldn't necessarily automatically think. But to me, when you're playing a game that among pickup basketball, not with refs, not with coaches, when part of the game is like automatically built into the game is like ways that everyone has to be able to get into the game. Ways that no one can own the game in perpetuity. Ways that the group, which is always changing, every team that gets on the court is going to change the dynamics of the game, but it's also going to change the rules so that there's no fixed laws in basketball. The law is not a law, the law is a negotiation every single time the new people come on the court. These to me, they suggest possible ways that we tend to one another's sorrows. We learn how to take care of one another. But they're also ways by which we learn how to survive. And survive what I think of as like many collapses. That's one of the things. I'm sort of like, what are the ways, what are the things that we do that we can point to and describe really good and be like, and again, like Saidiya Hartman, be like, oh, if I describe this really, really well, then I'm going to understand it better, and two, maybe other people will be like, oh, there's one, like we don't have to imagine this new way to survive. It's happening right there on the corner. Like what they're doing right there, or what my neighbor's doing right now by putting all his zucchini out on the blanket out front. Oh, that's right. That's a way that we can survive. Or how skaters, retake, private property. Trouble the idea of private property. All of these ways, dance floors, like how we become less discrete as bodies. We become sort of masses in ways. It feels like, it's a negotiation of sorrow in a way, because I'm trying to figure out what are these ways that we tend to one another's sorrows, and I feel like these are all places where we get to practice that, really get to practice that. And I think it's, like I said, I think it's evidence of how we do and how we will survive. And part of the things I ask in the beginning of the book too is like, this is a handful, and there's a zillion things I haven't talked about. And the fact of the matter is, I'll finish with this, sorry. This came out of my mouth the other day, and I think it's true, is that our alienation from one another is a market. We're sold that. Meanwhile, we're sold it and sold it and sold it and sold it and sold it. And the more we're shown a thing, the more we believe in it. My inclination is to be like, and this, and this, and this, and this. Look at the 5,000 ways that we love one another, that we make room for one another, that we keep each other in the game, that we share. Thank you.
Also, before I part ways and go elsewhere on you sign and whatnot, I wanted to take the opportunity, to thank Linda, to thank the King Arts Complex, and it's so beautiful to be back in the space. When we were back in the green room, I was like, I used to crawl around back here when I used to be like a kid in this book. But I wanted to say, whenever at some point when on tour for Little Devil, someone referenced a point in an essay where there's a direct address, where there's a turning to the audience and saying, hey, I'm here, like, that seems like a Ross Gay invitation. And I was like, that's the nicest thing that anyone has ever said to me. The poet Ivy Francis told me once when I was a young poet, and I was like, well, the work of writing poems feels so isolating. It feels like I'm so alone. I've never done anything like this before. And she said, you are actually not alone when you're writing the work. The work is in the presence of anyone you're reaching for while you're chasing after it. And I find myself so frequently reaching out for you, for what your work has taught me, what I've learned from your work, and what I've learned from the way that you approach the world, which is not, I feel like I have reformatted myself into a less cynical person because I've gotten to witness you. And I see it in not only my living, but of course by extension I see it in my writing. And I'm so grateful for you, man. I'm just like so overwhelmingly grateful for you. And I feel like the last time we did this, I left, like, you know, you told me that thing about how, like, this might be the last time we see each other. And I remember I left Gramercy and I was like, I didn't tell Ross how much his work meant to me. You know what I mean? I didn't want to let that pass, man. Your work has, I'm such a better writer because when I am sitting down to write, I am also reaching for you. So thank you.
I want to just say how amazing this evening was, and thanking you, Ross, and you, Hanif, and all of you in this room. We were all sort of part of this joyful time together, and I know we will all cherish it. So thank you so much. Also want to thank our booksellers here, Marcy, Natalie, and Katie, who brought all these books here, and they hope that you're going to get some more, and also for Ross to sign the ones you have in your hands.
And can I say one more thing too?
Yes.
Thank you again. Thank you everyone for hosting us. And also, we were talking about this too in the green room, that part of the writing process is this, like these conversations, like these questions, and get to doing this stuff. Like, you know, it's like it feels fixed on the page, but it's actually not fixed on the page in many ways. But one of those ways being that this conversation will inform what we do going forward. And you know, so and I know that there are other beloved writers here. Like, to be in these conversations in rooms with one another is like magic and blessed. So I just want to like say that, and I want to say thank you very much for being here. It means everything.